even know if the online marketing word is used around that time. I think it was still internet marketing. And I started my own online business, and then from there, I've started building companies and then working for companies. And so I've been doing digital marketing for tech startups for probably about more than 7 years, maybe. I can't really remember for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing since.
Right. So what are you doing right now? You want to share a little bit on? I think maybe you can
Sure.
share a bit more later on, right?
Okay. I've just recently launched my digital marketing agency that also tries to work with startups because that's my background. But we also work with some local brands, and it just recently launched. It's called XS by XS. And yeah, hopefully it gets off the ground just the same way that I've done for the startups I've worked with before.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, this brings us to Chris' presentation today, which is about marketing startups to Southeast Asia, right? And
All right, great.
right, let's hop into the presentation.
Sure. Just quickly share the presentation with you guys. And all right, so today's topic is marketing startups in Southeast Asia, things you need to know. And that's me on over there. As you can see, so I already mentioned to you guys, I'm currently the managing director of XS by XS. And if just quickly, we are currently obviously doing all the digital marketing from growth hacking, mobile advertising to Southeast Asia. So a quick background as well is that this company is also owned by a creative ad agency called XS Multimedia, which has also won several awards in both locally in Asia and also even as far as Europe. So skip to that. I'm a Filipino. I'm based in Manila, Philippines, but I was lucky enough to actually travel and also work with amazing people all over Asia. And what I've noticed is that obviously it's like Singapore is very different as a market as compared to Manila, as compared to Bangkok. And that really gave me an idea that not a lot of people actually have exposure to to these markets, more so if you're on the regional role. So I got into the role. I got promoted. So I was working for Pactor as a VP for digital marketing in Manila. And in 2 weeks, I was promoted to regional role, and I was clueless on what to do next, obviously. So I know that a lot of you guys possibly are either trying to reach the Southeast Asian market or have intention to also launch in another market aside from your country right now, and you're also close like what to do. It's because you know that it's a different market. So hopefully this presentation would give you more ideas on where to at least get started. And as mentioned Sharon earlier, I've worked with several companies like Lazada, Pactor, Duriana, Happy Fresh, GualFast, Datix. So I won't dwell too much on that. I also have a website, it's christopherstar.com, where I blog some information about growth hacking. But let's get started with marketing startups in Southeast Asia. But I guess before we get started with that, we need to first define what exactly am I talking about when we talk about Southeast Asia. Because geographically, there are about 11 countries in Southeast Asia. It's part of the ASEAN group, which is Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. But I separated Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, Brunei, and East Timor is because most of the tech startups I work with do not typically group them with the rest on top. And the reason for that, at least for Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos, and East Timor is more on the development of these countries are a little bit far behind than the rest. I'm not quite sure with Brunei because Brunei obviously is a rich country, but for some reason it's not typical for a startup like or like Rocket Internet to launch as well in Brunei. But I'm very interested in how these things would change over time. Obviously, these countries are all ramping up as well, and so I'm definitely looking into learning more about them as well. But just so you know, my personal experience is just on the 6 countries on top. Now, I also included Hong Kong and Taiwan, which are not obviously geographically located in Southeast Asia. They're East Asian countries, but typically they're also somehow added when we talk about digital marketing for Southeast Asia, because Hong Kong and Taiwan somehow don't really connect well with the other East Asian countries, which are big economies like China, South Korea, and Japan. So I've worked also with countries like Hong Kong and Taiwan. So when I talk about Southeast Asia, usually I talk about the 6 countries from Southeast Asia plus Hong Kong and Taiwan. And you might be wondering, so why does like Southeast Asia even matter? One thing is obviously just a few numbers here that might interest you. So it's expected to be about $2 billion by economy by 2025. It's already the 4th largest internet market. The data here is from Google and Temasek, and it's a little outdated because the recent data that I've gathered, it's roughly already 300 million users in Southeast Asia. And it's obviously also the fastest growing internet market in the world, with 700 million of them are mobile users, and there's 130% mobile penetration. So you can see the importance of digital marketing in Southeast Asia is a big opportunity, not just for businesses, but if you're a digital marketing practitioner looking to ramp up your career, it's a big opportunity for you as well to do regional. And if you're joining this summit basically because you want to learn more about digital marketing and you're not there yet, or you're probably from a traditional business transitioning to a more digitalized one, I think it's important to note why it's important. Previously, it's always about online versus offline, and the truth is now the line is really blurring, and the online spending is greatly shifting towards digital. Primarily because the users themselves are also going digital, but also the measurement of digital marketing is incomparable to traditional. So as the world transition more to a digitized world, obviously the importance of digital marketing and digital marketers has grown. So how do we actually win Southeast Asia? We know for a fact that these countries, unlike let's say you go to US or China where everyone kind of like speaks the same language, has similar cultures, Southeast Asia is very different. Like you have countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia that are predominantly Muslim. So there are limits in terms of what you can sell and what you can do. You can't sell alcohol to Muslims, obviously. You can't do gambling. And you go to countries like Philippines where gambling is not an issue, which is also very different from Singapore and Thailand, for example. So we know it for a fact that it's very different, but we also know that marketing and companies basically are trying to reach this whole market because of its importance as a whole ecosystem. So how do we begin with that? I will be sharing with you 3 ideas that you might already know about Southeast Asia or may not really know about it yet, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some examples that you might be like, oh, okay, it kind of makes sense that it's really just special for Southeast Asia. So I mentioned earlier that one thing that people think about South Asia is that it's very diverse, and so it's hard to think where to get started. Well, first is this region, and not just Southeast Asia, it's the whole Asia Pacific, is actually a mobile first market, which means that most people, mobile is the first or sometimes the only connection online. And what's great about this data is that mobile devices, especially your smartphones, are possibly the only device that you sleep with, you go to the toilet with, you can't leave your home without. And so it has a very, very personal relationship with consumers. And what that really gives you as a marketer is access to people anytime, anywhere. And you can bug them if you want to, but obviously that's not a great way to be a marketer. But in reality, you can. And we've seen marketers abuse this with like spamming with SMS. And you can now do that with, if you have an app, you can send them as many push notifications as you want. But being a mobile first market means that it allows you that you should also look at your placements, not just your device placements, not just your channel placements. So I've worked with some agencies when I was a head of marketing for some tech startups. And typically when I asked them like help and they would present to me a plan And their media plan is not divided in terms of device. They just tell me, okay, we'll show your ads on Facebook or on YouTube, but it doesn't really divide and doesn't give so much importance on mobile. And I think that's a big mistake, which you should, as a digital marketer, be able to distinguish that mobile experience is very different from desktop. User experience as well, mobile is very different from desktop. So the attention span of people is also very different. So while it's always with people, like the consumers have their mobile device, and most of the time they're almost always online. They're either connected to their Wi-Fi device or their 3G or LTE connection. But what marketers do is just completely ignore this fact. There are a lot of signals that you can see from just from the data that you can collect as from mobile. So telcos actually know, for example, if you're a prepaid user, how much you spend on your credit or your top-ups each month. And that's a powerful information that you don't really see a lot of media buyers or marketers include in their plan. They just basically lump sum everyone as, okay, I'll just do SMS marketing, and does not really do any targeting. So the old days, the user persona or customer profile typically just have your age and age range, like 18 to 35, male or female, interested in a specific brand, who goes shopping every week, etc. But now with mobile, you have more information. You even would know where do they go most of the time. If you're familiar with apps like Uber and Grab, who potentially collects your information and like which are your most visited areas, like where do you usually go, how long does it take for you to go from home to work. These information are very important and should be included in your digital strategy. So that's something that's somehow, it's not necessarily unique to Southeast Asia, but it's important to take note when you're marketing to Southeast Asia. Another thing is that localization is very important. Unlike in China or in the US, when you launch, you don't need to localize your campaigns typically. So for Southeast Asia, being a diverse market means that localization is a key to success, but it should go beyond language. I've worked with several tech startup founders, and the first thing they ask me usually is how to translate their application or their website to Filipino. Here's the thing. You can launch in Southeast Asia without localizing the language and using English only, but not in all countries. So I've done this with Guava Pass, for example. Most of the early employees are non-locals. They're residents of the countries, but not necessarily locals. So they don't necessarily speak or read the local language. But we are still able to launch English with English content. The reason for that is Singapore and Philippines are obviously English-speaking countries. Malaysia is also an English-speaking country somehow. And a lot of the capitals would have English speakers still. So you have Jakarta, you have Bangkok, which has a lot of English speakers as well. It might be sizable and like good enough size to get started with, and might potentially even be the perfect market for you. So if you're targeting expats, then obviously they should be able to understand like basic English, even if they're not English speakers. So you can really still launch in Southeast Asia, even with English only as your language. So it's not true that your localization therefore has to be always just the language. But it's very important still, because if you're really aiming to go big in certain countries, such as Vietnam, Indonesia, English will not get you there. Marketing would have to be local in a local language. So that's Bahasa Indo in Indonesia and Vietnamese for Ho Chi Minh. Without it, you can't reach the local market, the locals. What you can reach in English would potentially be just expats and what I personally call international locals. So international locals are those who are internationally educated or probably live overseas for quite some time. So they speak English and potentially also very westernized. So for localization, however, it should go beyond language, as I mentioned earlier. So if you launch on markets with English, that's fine, but you still need to localize. And we've done this for Paktor, for example, because in Paktor is a dating application, and the dating concept is not the same per country. And we only realized this as well along the way. So Paktor is a language, is a word in the Chinese language, which means going out or going out on date. So the concept exists in the Chinese culture. So Paktor is big in Singapore and Taiwan, but we actually somehow failed to go big in Philippines, for example, which is my country. And we later on realized that the concept of dating is very different in Philippines. So in Philippine language, there is no such thing as dating. People date only after you're already a couple. So there's courtship, and we have a word for courtship, but you don't date until you're officially a couple, which is very different from the concept of going out and date to find out more about the person, and then decide that you will be a couple after if you like what you discovered during the dating period. So it's very different for Philippines. And also as a market, Singapore is a much aging population. And it's much difficult with their lifestyle as well, with very hectic schedule to meet individuals of their same age. And that's not the case for Philippines. We're such a young population. Most of us are a big percentage are under 35. And we're such a huge population. We're over 100 million people. So it's not very difficult to find someone the same age. And also the work conditions is not as hectic or competitive, I would say, as in Singapore. So there's these kind of localizations that you need to look into. It's not necessarily just very limited in terms of language. It can be about their culture, it could be about religion, it could be the way of living, their user behavior, their readability to a market. So this is also something I've done for Lazada when in the early age of Lazada. They all wanted, this is the best practice. Everyone in digital marketing would tell you, never throw your traffic to your homepage. Like never. It's a bad idea. And I knew that when I joined Lazada. But I also knew that when it launched a couple of years ago, the market was just not ready. And so if you throw them in a page where there's like 5 items, or a category page which they're a bunch of products, if they don't see what they want, they're just going to stop and bounce. As compared to landing them on the homepage, it's just too many information for them, and they get excited. So I proved this to be right back then by showing them data, but you should also understand that you could look into benchmarks all over the world, and most of the benchmarks you would see are from maybe US, for example, and they may not be applicable to your market. In this case, for Philippine market at that time, throwing traffic to the homepage was the best performing campaign versus those that are targeted only to land on specific pages or specific category product pages. So there are these kind of localizations that you should also include when you create your digital marketing strategy. So aside from localization, that you guys already probably know that needs to be done anyway for Southeast Asia. When you talk about how do I get started, one thing that's easy, in my opinion, is that Facebook as a platform is available in all countries. We had this problem when I was still with Paktor, and we wanted to tap Yahoo, and we had a great deal from Yahoo Philippines at that time to be able to launch a regional campaign. Without realizing, remember, this is the time when I was fresh to the regional role. So I just thought, like, Yahoo is big in my country, Yahoo is big in Singapore, and Yahoo is big in US. It must be big everywhere. And so we started launching campaigns in all our countries. So we launched it in Vietnam, launched it in Thailand. And later on, the results for certain countries were disappointing. And it was not surprising because Yahoo obviously is not a huge channel in certain countries. And we didn't know it at that time. But now Facebook is everywhere. It's not necessarily the top or most visited website in certain countries. For example, in recent data I've seen, I think in Malaysia, Indonesia, and even in Singapore, more people are using or going to YouTube over Facebook. But in general, all of the Southeast Asian countries, even include Taiwan and Hong Kong as a market, Facebook is good. But there are countries, for example, like China, where Facebook is blocked, where you need to figure out how do you get around with that without going through like WeChat or other local sites. So for Guava Pass, we've still used Facebook um, because we know that some people in China, especially the expats, still access Facebook through VPN, and so we still targeted China. But you can't target cities in China um, because it's too small because it's blocked anyway. So we just targeted the whole area and uh, hope that some expat would find our ad during the time we're launching it. So it's a bit of like trying to hack it, but it's really very difficult to do it for China because I also have very limited knowledge on this market. But for Singapore, for Southeast Asia, Facebook is something that is used in all of the companies I work with. And I really started, I would say, my career in terms of digital marketing on Facebook. So I'm very, I would say, I keep myself updated to everything that happens on Facebook more than the other channels. Google is also present in the region, and it's also quite big. The difference really is more on where do people spend their time most of the time, right? So Facebook, a lot of Southeast Asian consumers spend a lot of time on Facebook, though as I mentioned earlier, some countries would probably spend more time on YouTube. But on Google, because it's more on demand based, especially for Google search, it really varies per country, but it's still you can still use Google as a channel. And just so you know as well that Facebook actually hits #1 spot as media source, especially for mobile advertising for both gaming and non-gaming. This is from AppsFlyer's recent performance index data, where they saw that Facebook is the #1 driver of installs for both gaming and non-gaming apps. But it's #4 in terms of retention, however. So you need to look into that in terms of, okay, where do I get the most number of installs? Easy. It's always going to be Facebook. Google can also play a big role, especially on Android. iOS, however, is a different story. But if you're going to launch a startup or a marketing campaign, you cannot ignore Facebook. It's just really out there in Southeast Asia. And that's pretty much it for like how do you enter Southeast Asia as a market and how can you potentially win. You need to just remember that Facebook is a huge platform that can jumpstart everything for you. Localization is really key for that, and also that aside from localization and Facebook are two important things is that it's a mobile first market. So you can't ignore the fact that you can do more targeting, you can strategize a little bit more that's really based on what's their user behavior on mobile. And aside from this, I want to share with you what's the upcoming trends, because these are things that you probably already know if you're already working with a regional campaign. But things that you should also look forward to that I think would be going big this year, or at least early next year, are some digital trends. I think the whole focus now, and this was also focused or mentioned by Google on Think with Google website. There's a great shift in terms of micro moments. It's all about personal moments with your brand, and you can't really ignore that this is where it's shifting. I mentioned to you earlier that the Southeast Asian market is a mobile first market, and therefore this allows you to have a more personalized one-on-one relationship with your consumers. But obviously, you can't be sitting there, chatting with all of your 1 million customers, or replying to all the emails of your 1,000 app users. So there are ways on how you can create that micro moment, but it's very important. And that's where I believe digital strategy should really start focusing more on. So the first thing is the shift to micro influencers. I remember when I was still with companies like Pactor or Guava Pass. We use a lot of influencers to get the word out there, and we don't necessarily always use bloggers or celebrities, which is what's commonly used by a lot of brands these days. They hire the most famous blogger in their category, the most famous celebrity who has um, funding on a certain activity. Let's say they're a very sporty celebrity, they hire this person to post on Facebook or Instagram. Now, while this still kind of works, I really think that the shift should go towards micro influencers. And these influencers is not so much about um, reach. You're not trying to buy them so they can tell their friends and their followers that they like you. It's really more about amplifying the authenticity that they already like you. And you're not simply just buying it. And with micro influencers, these are much smaller groups. We're talking about 10,000 users versus your celebrity with a million users. It doesn't seem to make sense. But what you do instead is you hire a bunch of micro influencers, and in total, they have a million reach, but individually, they may have like 100,000, 10,000 followers. But you wouldn't think like maybe it's not going to work, right? But with the recent changes on algorithms, especially on Facebook and Instagram, what there was already a study about the drop of engagement rate as your user base increases. And so if you're interested to learn more about it, there's a link down below where you can go and learn more about how micro influencers are actually delivering results far more than popular celebrities and bloggers. And this is something that you should already include in your digital strategy this year because it's already happening. It's not even a prediction anymore. It's really the way to go these days. While you can still use celebrities and bloggers, no hurt in doing that. I think you will really see results more on micro influencers. And aside from micro influencers, something I've noticed this year that's quite big is instant messaging. And I'm just not talking about apps like chat apps, right? So that's one thing, instant messaging, but also like how to communicate instantly. So there's instant articles, accelerate mobile pages, how it changes in terms of your SEO ranking, for example. You need to make sure that you're optimized not just for search engine, but make sure that it's also mobile friendly, and it's even better if you can transform it to an accelerated mobile page, so Google will rank you better, especially for mobile. These changes are happening right now as well, and it's very important because this changes how users experience your brand. For example, for instant messaging, it's somehow killing browsers nowadays. If you notice, when someone shares a video or a link to you, you no longer go out of the app of these messaging apps. You experience everything from there and not from a browser. And it really changes how it looks like. And if you want to control how users interact with your brand, you need to look into this as well. It's no longer just in the past, it's like, okay, how does my website look like on desktop? And how does it look like on my phone? And that's it. Now there's like a million different ways that they're going to experience your brand, especially with instant messaging, how they see your content on desktop. And then when they're on your mobile website or on Facebook, they experience a different content. There's less information or less distraction. There's less images, there's no banner ad or less banner ads on your instant article page rather than on your website, for example. So the experience is kind of altered. And if it's important for you, you might want to look into that. So aside from instant messaging, chatbots is also something I'm very, very interested in. It's quite new. Lots of different companies are testing it out these days. I think this is going to be very important as people tend to interact more using instant messaging. And the chatbots are not just really there to replace customer service as initially it was seemed to be intended for some companies, but it does a lot of different things, especially if you pair it up with machine learning or artificial intelligence. It can do so much more than just basic replies. And I've talked to some chatbot startups where everything is really just a chatbot. They don't even have a mobile app. They have a website, obviously, but the whole experience is just as a chatbot. And I was very interested with that, and so I've asked them like, what can exactly like the difference? So there's a dating chatbot these days that tries to compete with Tinder, for example. There's also a chatbot I spoke with that focuses on personal finance. So how do you integrate chatbot to your business is very important, because you know the importance of, for example, an email list, but people these days are less and less reading their emails, but they're always on their instant messaging maybe. And this is a great way to interact with them without you messaging them one by one. And chatbots is a way to go to scale your personal messages to your consumers. And I think you should definitely include this as well if you can allot time and resources to develop your own chatbot. And there are free chatbot makers or developers out there, that's off the box, like templated widgets that you can customize by yourself, or even hire freelancers or agencies to do this for you as well. So it's not that hard. I think it's a way to go for some businesses, but I don't always suggest it, obviously. Another thing that's quite big is real time. There's more, live stream is really going mainstream. This also means that consumers are able to experience your brand or your startup, your service in a more real time. Just last night, I saw, I think it was ASOS, or I'm not sure which brand it is, where it had a guessing game that's happening live on Facebook, where people can guess if the item is higher or lower than the other item, and then the best uh, guests would win a prize from the company. I also know Shopee, a C2C app, have launched live auctions on Facebook where they auction off different items that you can find on Shopee app, and their followers love the idea. And this is something that you can utilize as long as you have a mobile phone. You don't need to have expensive cameras to do this. In the past, like video marketing is just very difficult to pull off because one of the internet speed, but also because it's very expensive to invest on video cameras and editing softwares, and more so the skill to actually edit. But these days, your consumers are so open to a more real time conversation, and you don't need to edit. You've seen a lot of big celebrities and even like speakers or authorities in digital marketing doing the same thing, because really it's the power of mobile that allows us to connect through live stream, and this is not going to go away. I think it's just going to keeps getting better. Unsurprisingly, even Instagram has it. They're just different formats. Like in Instagram it expires, and then on Facebook it stays there if you want to. It's kind of just different formats, but really it's going big. In fact, Factor, which is a company I used to work with, and I'm still a minor shareholder as an early employee, have recently acquired a startup in Taiwan who focuses nothing on but just live streams. It's such a huge thing that you should also look into. And I don't mean to like buy a real time live stream app, but you should include it on your strategy as well. And lastly is on demand. We love going, using on demand applications such as Uber or Grab for our transportation, or buying from Uber Eats or Deliveroo or Food Panda. So on demand has been there for quite some time now, but I think it's still going to be a trend, not just in these verticals, but in even more verticals. And because of mobile devices, it really allows users to be a click away from anything that they need and what they want. And so that also changes their perception and user behavior. And therefore, you should look into this as part of your business strategy, not just marketing. For example, most of online stores still would deliver products within a few days, but that doesn't kind of make sense anymore, because there are services like Lalamove, Ninja Van, who can potentially deliver this to you in much faster time, right? Grab Express as well, if Grab can deliver it to you. on the same day within the same city. So on demand is not going to go away. I think it's really going to change a lot of business models. But also in marketing, you need to look into how do you then integrate on demand into your marketing, into your digital marketing strategy. Um, because it's like people are no longer willing to wait. With mobile devices, they just know that everything is within access. So there's no waiting time for them. So you need to also look into that as part of your strategy. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, the key takeaway is just to think micro, um, focus on localization. You need to know that this market is mobile, and that's a great way to interact and have a conversation with your consumers. And because it's very direct relationship, make sure you stay personal in terms of your marketing messages. You know, people don't go with hi and then that's it anymore. It's going beyond just that. Personalization now means that you also understand what's their behavior in your app or your website or your business in such a way that your messages reflect that as well. So always think about micro when you think about Southeast Asia, not because it's a small market, but because it's such a mobile first market that micro moments are very, very crucial. And that's pretty much it. If you're interested to get a copy of the slide and see the links there for the reference, you could go to the link below, which is bit.ly /DM Summit 2017, and I'll send you an email with this link. Thank you.
So how would you tackle it? You know, like I'm sure you get a lot of questions from like startups asking like, where should I go first? You know, or you know, how should the strategy be? What would you advise for someone like that? You know, who asks a generic question like that?
Yeah, it's not quite generic, to be honest, because I usually work with startups who have regional ambition, and so this is exactly your question to me. So, Chris, I need to launch in Southeast Asia. Where do I start and stuff like that? I think it really goes back to some of your resources, because while you can reach the whole market with, let's say, Facebook advertising, localization is still very important. So you need the local team for that. If you don't have a local team um, for that knowledge or for, let's say, translation, it's going to be very difficult. But we've done it still. There are tools and ways to do it. You can hire a freelancer. You can hire. We even hired like through Fiverr for basic translation if need be. But really, if you're looking at launching in Southeast Asia, right now it's just the big cities. So you talking about capitals, so Singapore, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, Jakarta, Manila, and then Hong Kong, and then Taipei. Um, it's not much really different. Or you can also go to Bali, for example, for Jakarta. Sorry, for Indonesia. But that's how it is right now. You can't really target the whole country. It's just the readiness of the market. There's so many of these things, but if you want to launch, you need some local support one way or the other. Even if you have someone like me in your team, you can't possibly be successful relying on a regional office, which is usually what they want to do. Just have a regional office oversee everything. It's difficult because you still need some local information, knowledge, connections to get things going.
Yeah, I'm sure you get that question a lot, and you know, like I think you crush the hopes of some people who might think, you know, hey, I just want to expand to Southeast Asia all around, but you know, it's geographically so close, but you know, you just move from one city or one country to the other, the language changes, the food changes, everything changes, right? So
Yeah.
definitely, I mean, I love what you said about just you know finding the people who can tell you the context. So I've even heard like in Malaysia, you know, like different parts of Malaysia actually have different kind of like a ways they write something and the way they express something, right? So and I love your advice on just you know possibly hiring freelancers, even if not to do translation, but to get them to even vet through like does this make sense? You know, like you know when we try to translate it, does the context translate? You know, I think that
Yeah.
is so important to make sure. Like I mean, if we are going back to technical things like click through rates and all that stuff, if it doesn't make sense, you know, people can tell at one go. You know, this is
Mhm.
not local. And I think there is this thing about Southeast Asians being like, you know, hey, we like it localized. You like it very localized. Um,
Yes.
So what would the advice be? Would you say like, if people are really invested to really hire like yeah, freelancers is a good way to get started, I think. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I guess other stuff like, you mentioned things like, it's very, very true. You mentioned things like real time, on demand and things like that. How would you prioritize? Like, you mentioned quite a few things. I think mobile is definitely huge, and I love
Mhm.
what you shared about how the experience is completely different. How do you sometimes prioritize? Do you like a few favorite things you like to kind of recommend to the various startups you work with, or is it every time it's a different strategy altogether?
It's definitely a different strategy altogether most of the time. Though I did notice that there is a pattern that I can share with them. Like there's a platform you would always use, such as like, as I mentioned earlier, Facebook. But I also forgot to mention earlier, which is on the slide earlier, I said that mobile first, but not always. And the reason for that is because it still really depends on your market.
Right.
So for example, a lot of us now uses applications. So a lot of startup founders approach me and say, "Hey, Chris, I launched an app," and sometimes I wonder why they even think that they need an app. Maybe they just need a website for it. You don't need to invest so much on an application, even if the market is a mobile first market, because for an application, you need to have a kind of behavior where people form habits and it's a repetitive action. So I have an upcoming client, for example, where they have a bad uninstall rate and they understand the reason. It's because people buy from their app once and they probably buy again next vacation. So they're gonna uninstall this after, right? So for example, AirAsia, you will download the app. I do have the app because I fly frequently. But if I'm the type of person who flies once a year, I won't download this app. So these kind of things you also need to consider in terms of your approach, because while it makes sense that it's a mobile first market, you want to reach the millennials and reach the cool kids of Instagram, maybe it doesn't make sense. And so you also need to step back and not just join the cool crowd and still apply. So even all the things I mentioned, live stream to chatbots, if it doesn't make sense for a business, if you're a mom and pop shop and who has like 10 customers, it doesn't make sense to have a chatbot investment, even for like $10 a month kind of thing. If you have very few customers at the moment, you don't need it maybe. So it still really depends. Is I guess the always the best answer, right? So it depends.
Yeah, so very, very interesting. I mean, for anyone who wants to, start going to regional and all that, what are some of the tips you have to, quickly get up to speed? Besides talking to you, of course, or like engaging.
They can definitely talk to you as well. But I think in terms of going regional, um, it's really just the understanding. I really suggest, especially if you're a founder or a digital marketer who wants to also learn more about these markets, go to the countries, understand the culture, and it's it's something I only recently did, and I discovered so much more from it. I didn't realize, for example, in Malaysia, while probably people would not talk so much about it openly, that race is a big thing for them. And in Philippines, where I came from, race is not much of an issue, or it's not even talked about. So these kind of things are things you wouldn't know until you actually there and experience it. And for example, if you talk to like it's almost a joke when you talk to Singaporeans, like you add la, for example. It's funny in a way when you're not from there, but that's really understanding Singlish is part of the culture, and that's how it's special for them. That can help give you insight on how to better communicate with them. That's different. So I mean, it's cheap nowadays to travel in Southeast Asia. So I highly suggest to visit these countries, make friends, learn from them, and really feel the vibe and culture. And you'll become a better founder or a better digital marketer by just being exposed to it.
Awesome, awesome. And you kind of brought me to a similar question, but maybe not entirely on the topic of marketing to startups in Southeast Asia. But I'm curious to know, like, what do you think makes a good digital marketer?
I would say that a good digital marketer must be open to always learn. And this is the reason why I love teaching, because for me, it's a way for me to learn new things as well from questions people ask for me. But I also love attending someone else's seminar or webinars and taking trainings, because digital marketing is really still evolving. And what you know yesterday changes today, and it will change tomorrow. So for you to be a good digital marketer, it's not about what you know today, but your willingness to keep learning.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And learning how to learn, right? I think that's like such a big point about really good marketers, right? And yeah, I mean, so I mean, you shared a lot about how someone can become a better regional, um, be it a marketer or a founder, and how the kind of open mindset to think. So, what is the one advice that you would like to share with the community in the digital marketing community in Asia? On how what's one piece of advice you would like to share to the crowd?
That's a good question. And there's a lot of things that someone can advise in particular, but I think I've already said earlier that you need to constantly learn. I think it's really great. There are like digital marketing summits like this that allows you to not just learn from experts, but also potentially create relationships with other people and learn from them. You can join groups, like digital marketing groups in Facebook, for example, and many more. I think it's because it's important that you keep learning, that the only advice I could give is also keep networking and meet people and learn from each other.
Definitely, definitely. Like, just visiting and like everything you said is just kind of like leading to, meeting more people, having an open mind, learning from each other. And that's what,
Yeah,
I think that's one thing I really love about Chris. He's always like, he's always just, in different cities. I always see him like traveling around, and he's just trying new things all the time. And he's very very open to like new things and just give you a shot. Being part of it. The energy is great, and I think that's partly what makes him such a unique and one of the most experienced like regional marketers I know around. And I think with that, really, really thank you so much for sharing today. It's been enlightening. I think it's going to be very useful for many people, especially when they start thinking like what there is. But I'm sure there is a lot more intricacies, and things will keep changing, and it's up to everyone to kind of stay on top of things. So
right.
thanks, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And
Sure. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me too.